Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss any update from Rouse IAS Study Circle. Join the only official Telegram channel of Rouse IAS Study Circle to get the relevant materials and important updates.
Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified. The what, why and how of the newspaper analysis on a civil service examinations perspective. Today we are going to discuss the Hindu Delhi edition dated 20th August 2022. The topics which are to be discussed have been displayed on your screen and the timestamping of the same has been provided in the description box below. So this is our first topic. This topic has appeared at page number 12 and is in relation to the Rathole mining. The context of this very news article today is that recently there was an accident on the illegal coal mining being done in the state of Meghalaya, which has killed one person and has left another battling for his life. However, this issue is not very recent or not very new. Even in the past, there have been several incidences of death, injury, health hazards, as well as destabilization of rocks in the state of Meghalaya. And the primary reason for this is the Rathole mining. Now in this session we should understand that what exactly do we mean by Rathole mining and how is it so dangerous. Now if you scroll to the various newspaper articles and to various newses, you will find that such incidents are very common in Meghalaya, especially in the East Jaintia Hills. So first, with the help of this very diagram, let us understand that what exactly is the Rathole mining. So now open pit mining are conducted for the coal extraction in the state of Jharkhand, in parts of Chhattisgarh as well as Odisha. The prime reason for that mining in those states is that in those states there we have the Gondwana deposits, and these Gondwana deposits are very thick deposits, and that is why the open cast mining is suitable for these areas. However, the Meghalaya is the plateau region where we have steep sided plateaus and hills, and in the state of Meghalaya we have thin coal seams. Here the coal seams are very thin, and that is why it is not economically viable to extract the coal through open cast mining technologies, and that is why an informal type of mining is conducted here. What exactly is done here is that the local people dug the hole into the ground surface. This hole consists of vertical tunnel as well as the horizontal tunnel. These holes are so narrow that their width ranges from around 3 to 5 meters, which allow only 1 to 2 people at a time to go into these tunnels. Once they enter into these vertical tunnels, then they start moving horizontally and they reach to the point where there are available the thin seams of coal. And then on the border of these rocks, they start digging this coal manually. So that is why this is known as the rat hole, because they have dug the earth's surface in a form of very narrow holes, similarly as the rats do. But now because this is unscientific, informal, there are huge chances of risks. There are no pillars erected to support this overlying land, because of which the ceiling sometimes fall down. Moreover, these rat holes are also fed by certain rivers, the groundwaters, which during the flooding events fill these holes with their water. So what eventually happens is that many of the mining workers get entrapped in these water filled holes, which in turn lead to their death. So this is basically the rat hole mining, an informal type of mining which is conducted with vertical tunnels as well as the horizontal tunnels of very narrow dimensions. Now NGT, that is National Green Tribunal, in 2014 has put a ban on the rat hole mining so as to serve the human health and protect the vulnerable section, especially the children. In this rat hole mining, as we have discussed, because these openings are of very narrow dimensions, just 3 to 5 meter wide, so many a times it happens that because the adults cannot move freely in these holes, and that is why the children are forced to enter into these holes and to dig coals. Those children crawl onto the surface of these holes and then mine the coal. So that is why NGT in 2014 had put an altogether complete ban on this practice. However, the reality is that this practice still goes on and the people are still killed in these rat holes.
In this line, now we shall analyze that what are the various issues involved in all this thing. The first and the foremost issue is of the health and safety of the mining workers which are there in these rat holes. As we have discussed that many a times there is a collapse of ceiling. Sometimes the workers also suffocate to death because of inhaling of several toxic gases. Many a times because of these floods also the health and life of these workers are put to risk. The second issue is of the environmental hazards which it poses. The coal which is extracted from these thin seams, this coal is transported and then collected openly at some point from where it again is transported to the industries. So till the time when this coal is collected over this in the open atmosphere, there is a release of gases and the environment gets polluted. Moreover, because of their transportation, there is a rise of vehicle traffic in these areas, which in turn further causes the environmental pollution. Similarly, there is also the risk of destabilization of rocks. As soon as the ceilings collapse, there will be a change of dynamic conditions of these rocks, and these rocks might further collapse, leading to several hazards, for example, landslides, rock falls, etc. The next issue is of the water contamination. In this coal mining, there are several pollutants which get released and get intermixed with the groundwater. This water is further used for various purposes, for example, drinking, which in turn pose a serious risk to the health of the people living in the surrounding areas. Then there is also the issue of nexus between the politicians as well as the coal mafias. We can understand this very fact that if we know that in 2014 National Green Tribunal has banned this rat hole mining practice, so the question arises that why still the people are getting killed because of this rat hole mining? Why this ban has not been properly enforced? Why the law enforcement agencies in the state of Meghalaya are not implementing the directives given by the tribunal? Because there is a clear-cut case of political as well as coal mafia nexus. But then, as we say, that reality is not in white or black areas, it sometimes lie in the gray areas. The thing is that a huge revenue of the state comes from these coal mining activities. As we all know that Meghalaya does not have the fertile plains, its land is not suitable for agriculture purposes, there are not much industries, neither the secondary industries nor the tertiary industries. So that is why the local population is very much dependent upon this coal mining activity for their sustenance. And that is why there is a huge socio-economic dependence on this rat hole mining for the people living in nearby areas as well as for the state. Nevertheless, this does not justify this practice because in the end the human losses are more important compared to the economic losses. And that is why the state must do its bit to generate alternate employment avenues, and this practice must be stopped altogether. If not complete stop, then it must be regulated by taking appropriate safety measures for the mining workers who are involved in this particular sector. This topic has appeared at page number 11 and it reads, India is deliberating on the Ocean Diversity Pact. Now this topic becomes very important because in the recent times, as we all know, that resources on the land have been extincting and therefore the mankind is moving towards the ocean in order to reap the potential of the resources of oceans. So that is why when we have to understand the oceans, when we have to analyze the importance of oceans, there are two broader aspects of the oceans which needs to be recognized, and the debate goes back to the economic development versus ecological conservations. So on one hand, if we see the economic potential of the oceans, they provide us various resources, for example, polymetallic nodules. Then they are also of utmost importance for maritime navigation. Various sources of energy, for example, currents, tides, D2O, etc. Then several biotic resources, for example, fishes. So the point is that there are several resources which ocean provides us.
But on the other hand, oceans also have their ecological sanctity. They are also the houses of corals, planktons, etc. Moreover, we also know in the backdrop of the climate change, the sea level is rising, which in turn is affecting the sea composition also in terms of changing the thermal as well as salinity parameters. Then we have also coming across the events of ocean acidification. So that is why in this aspect the point is that we need to conserve the oceans in its ecological sense also. So that is why, in order to ensure a sustainable balance between the economy as well as ecology, India is deliberating on the Ocean Diversity Pact. But the details of pact are yet to come. But in this very line, we should understand an important convention, that is United Nations Convention on Laws of Seas. Now, what is this United Nations Convention on Laws of Seas? Now, as we all know that because the resources in the oceans are of paramount importance, and that is why all the countries will be willing to tap its potential. But this in turn may lead to certain conflicts also. And in order to maintain the peace and freedom of navigation, there are certain laws which determine the rights of various countries on the resources of these oceans. These oceans are divided into several maritime zones. And in order to avoid the conflict, the countries are provided specific rights vis-a-vis the different maritime zones. So that is why in today's session we will also learn about various types of maritime zones which are provided in the United Nations Convention on Laws of Seas. So as you can see here, the important maritime zones are internal waters, territorial seas, contiguous seas, exclusive economic zone also known as EEZ, and the high seas. Now we will learn about these zones. First of all, this is the baseline. Now what is the baseline? Baseline is the low water line which is designated by each state. The water between this baseline as well as between the coast of any country, that is the water which is landwards towards this baseline, is known as the internal water. So that means, let's say if this is our India and this is the baseline, so the water which is lying over here, that is between the coast as well as the baseline, will be referred to as the internal waters. Now, legally speaking, the country or the state has all the rights with regard to the internal waters in the same manner as it has the rights over its land surface. That means the internal waters will be governed as per the national laws. The resources which lie over there will also belong to the state, as well as no other country will have the right of innocent passage. Now, what is innocent passage? So, let us understand this thing. Freedom of navigation is the basic right for every country in these oceans. That is, every country must be able to navigate freely. That navigation is for the economic as well as the strategic needs of all the countries. But it might happen that navigation or the movement of one particular country might be detrimental for the other country. So, if the navigation is purely peaceful, it is not affecting or it is not detrimental for the rights or the interests of any specific country, then that is known as the innocent passage. So, this right to innocent passage is given to the countries so that they can navigate freely without affecting the neighboring countries' interests in a negative manner. But in these internal waters, even the right of innocent passage is not given to other country. That is, so in the common man's language, the water which is between the coast and the baseline will be treated as the land of the country for all the practical purposes. After this baseline, up to the distance of 12 nautical miles, lies the maritime zone of territorial seas. Now, practically speaking, all the powers which a country has over its internal waters extend to the territorial seas as well. That is, it will be governed by the national laws. Resources will belong to the coastal states. But there is just one difference between internal waters and territorial sea. In the territorial sea, the other countries are given the right of innocent passage. So that means in internal waters, there is no innocent passage. In the territorial sea, however, there is a right of innocent passage. Other rights, that is the legal rights or the economic rights, remain same over the internal waters as well as territorial sea. And because we have discussed that this water is from the legal perspective is to be treated just as the land, so that is why the airspace above this particular zone, that is up to 12 nautical miles from the baseline, also belong to the specific country. That is, it is the national airspace. Now comes after this the contiguous zone. It lies for the 12 nautical miles beyond the territorial sea, or it is up to 24 nautical miles from the baseline. So the rights of a country in this contiguous zone is different from the territorial seas. The rights of the country gets diminished in the contiguous zone in the context that the space above the contiguous zone, that is the airspace, lies within the domain of international space, and that is why the country, that is India, does not have the power on the airspace lying above the contiguous zone. But still, in the contiguous zone, the coastal country has the power to punish. That is, if any crime is committed within the zones of the contiguous areas, then it has to be governed by the laws of the country, and that country has the power to punish for these crimes. Next comes the exclusive economic zone, that is EEZ. The range of EEZ is 200 nautical miles. And then again, the legal rights further get diminished in the sense that the country has only the economic rights over this area. That is, all the resources which lie in this exclusive economic zone belong to the specific coastal country. That is why the name is exclusive economic zone. So the country has economic rights over this area, but the other countries will be having the right of freedom of navigation. So the country has economic rights, that is to exploit the resources or to conserve the resources will belong to the specific country. If it needs to utilize the potential of the energy of the ocean, then it can do so. However, here is one thing specifically for India which is very important. That is section 188 of CRPC as well as section 7 of Maritime Zones Act. According to these acts, India has the power to proceed against the person who has committed some crime on the exclusive economic zone territory. Now comes the last zone, that is the high seas. High seas lie beyond the exclusive economic zone. Now, no specific country has any type of right over the high seas. They are open for all, and that is why they are one of the global commons. Any country can use the high seas in a sustainable manner. The countries can use the high seas for peaceful purposes as well as for science based research. So, that is all about the UN clause which is relevant from the civil services examinations perspective. Here we have talked about various maritime zones, that is the internal waters, territorial seas, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone and the high seas. The rights of the coastal countries gradually diminishes moving from internal waters towards the high seas. Let us discuss this topic. This topic has appeared at page number 14 and deals with a very important theme which is relevant in international trade. Therefore, it comes under the GS3 syllabus. The topic reads FTA norms, that is, Free Trade Agreement norms, to prevail in the rules of origin disputes. The context of this topic is a little bit technical because it says that the recently Finance Ministry of India has said that the exemptions specified in a FTA with regard to the country of origin would prevail in case of conflict between the Revenue Department and an importer. However, from the civil service examinations perspective, the important thing in this news article is that we should be aware about what are rules of origin, what is its significance, and what is the issues involved regarding the rules of origin in the international trade, and what is the WTO's stand over it. So let us understand this with an example. So now let us assume that there are three countries. One is India, second is China, and third is Vietnam. Now we all know that international trades rules are very much dependent upon the bilateral as well as regional negotiations. And these negotiations in turn are dependent upon the types of relationships which two or more countries have with each other. By this I mean to say that whenever rules between India and China are to be made, that will be dependent upon the relationship the India and China is carrying. On the other hand, for the similar trade, the rules might be different between India and Vietnam because the relationship between India and Vietnam is totally different. Right. So that is why various parameters ranging from economic parameters to the strategic parameters to geopolitical considerations and also including the people to people contact and all those things come into play at the platforms of bilateral negotiations which deal with the bilateral trade. Right? So, let us analyze India and China bilateral trade relations. We know that between India and China bilateral trade, India faces a very high current account deficit. Moreover, there are several dumping activities also which China dump their low cost materials into India. And then there are several issues between India and China. They also have their security concerns. Then there are also issues related to the privacy breaches, over dependence on China for certain raw materials. Then there are certain conflicts, for example, in Doklam, in Ladakh, and several other areas. On the other hand, India and Vietnam share friendly policies. So it might happen that to restrict, for example, dumping activities from China, India might levy certain duties. On the other hand, to promote the industries in Vietnam, India might give certain relaxations for the products which Vietnam is exporting to the India. That means India is not imposing any duties, right? So this is the practical scenario. So what might happen is, but now how India will determine that any product which is coming towards India is made in China or in Vietnam? That is where the rules of origin come into play. Now, rules of origin are very important because it will help India to understand that where that product has actually been manufactured or originated. If it is originated in China, then it will face certain duties. If it is originated in Vietnam, then it might not face certain duties. But now we know that today is the era of globalization. One final product is made in different countries. At successive stages, there are value additions to the specific product, and therefore, when it reaches to, let's say, India, it has passed through several countries for their intermediary value additions. But now this thing can be misused by certain countries. For example, in order to avoid the duties, the China might export some product to Vietnam so as to re-export it to India. So now the issue becomes that the product which India is receiving is directly from the Vietnam. So that means it does not invite certain duties. But in reality, that product was imported by Vietnam from China. So China has rerouted its product. It is not directly sending its product to India, but it has rerouted it via Vietnam towards India. And that is why it can misuse the considerations which were given by India to Vietnam. And to address this particular issue, there should be stringent guidelines so as to measure that where that product has originally made and how the rules of origin has to be levied on those products. So that is why it is said that rules of origin are the criteria needed to determine the national source of a product. Their importance is derived from the fact that duties and restrictions in several cases depend upon the sources of imports. Now, rules of origin are used for various purposes as we have discussed. It might be used to implement the measures and instruments of commercial policy such as anti-dumping and safeguard duties. It might also be used to determine whether the imported products shall receive most favored nation status or the preferential treatment status. Then it can also be used to analyze the trade statistics between various countries, that if India is facing current account deficit, then with which country, how much current account deficit is India facing. Further, it can be applicable for labeling and marketing requirements, and further also for the government procurements. There are various such activities for which we need to know that where some product has actually originated. Now, when it comes to General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, it has no specific rules governing the determination of the country of origin of goods in international commerce. And that is why each party is free to determine its own origin rules. And now, because each party is free to determine its own rules, there are very high chances that the rules of different countries might come in conflict with each other. And in this very regard, that is why certain guidelines or certain concrete parameters must be governed, must be made at the international level in order to reduce the malpractices by certain countries and to ensure equity in international trade. So now we will move towards this particular article. This article has appeared as a lead article in today's The Hindu Daily edition. The topic reads The Injustice of Exceptionalism. This topic is in the context of the recent Bilkis Bano case. The case is not recent, but it has come into the daily headlines because the convicts which were responsible for the raping of Bilkis Bano have been released by the Gujarat government. Their sentence has been remitted, and that is why this article has appeared in the newspaper. So, in this very sense, let us look at the issues involved. So first of all, let us say that what is the Gujarat's current remission policy? This remission policy was adopted in 2014 and it makes those convicted of the rape ineligible for the premature release. That means that whatever sentence has been awarded to the convicts before completing that sentence, if that sentence is for the offense of rape, the remission cannot be provided to them. However, in this very regard, the Supreme Court of India had earlier ruled that remission question in this case would be governed by the remission policy of 1992 that was in the force at the time of conviction, which did not exclude those convicted of rape from executive remission. So now this means that 1992 policy does not have this exclusion, which 2014 policy has. Now, what exactly is the background of the remission, or what is the practical aspect of this remission? First of all, because prisons comes under the law and order, which is a state subject, and that is why various state governments have laid down behavior or activities that can earn prisoners a certain amount of days as remission. And this will be then deducted from their sentence. Practically, it means that let's say if some prisoner is having a very good behavior, it will earn certain days of remission. So let us assume that there is a prisoner X who, because of his good behavior, has earned 2 years remission. And now let us assume that the total sentence which was awarded to that prisoner was, let's say, 10 years. But now, because he has earned the 2 years remission because of his good behavior, he can be released after 8 years. That is 10 minus 2 years, because those remission days will be deducted from their total sentence. Besides this, the state governments also developed the premature release rules that include the power to give the effect to the governor's power of remission under Article 161. That is the pardoning powers of the governor, which at the central level corresponds to the pardoning powers of the president. So this is the background of the remission. But now, as a society or as the aspirant of the civil service examination, we must understand that remission is a right. And this is contrary to the popular belief that remission is the privilege which is given to certain convicts. No, remission is a right, and this has also been pointed by the Supreme Court. So this should be understood in this manner, that the basic objective of prisons is not for the punishment but the reformation of the convicts. It should provide an opportunity to every convict to reform themselves and to re-include or to reintegrate them in society as a good and productive individual. And that is why remission is born out of the central objective of prisons to operate as reformative and rehabilitative spaces. and therefore the Supreme Court has recognized the remission as an inherent part of prisoners' right to life. That is why remission is a right and not a privilege. Further, it should also be understood that the process of remission, as we have seen that it is the prerogative of the state government, it is not within the domain of the judiciary, but it is within the powers of the executive. This should be very clear to all of you. There are certain grounds for remission which Supreme Court has laid down in Lakshman Naskar versus Union of India case in 2000. It is whether the offence is an individual act of crime that does not affect the society. Second, whether there is a chance of crime being repeated in future or not. Third, whether the convict has lost the potentiality to commit the crime. Fourth, whether any purpose is being served in keeping the convict in prison. And fifth is the socio-economic conditions of the convict's family. And as we have discussed, that the conduct or the behavior in the jail, along with the factors, the seriousness of the crime, the status of the co-accused, etc., are considered while discussing that whether a prisoner should be remitted or not. The jail manuals contain the rules that allow certain days of remissions in every month for good behavior of the convicts. And the data from the Prison Statistics 2020 show that 61% of the convicts in jail are serving the life sentences. In this very line, we should also look at the legal perspective, that is from the legal angle as well as the constitutional angle, which deals with the laws on remissions. First, we have discussed it is related to the pardoning powers of the President under Article 72 and the pardoning powers of the Governor under Article 161. Next, we have again discussed prisons is a state subject. The state governments, that is the executive, have the power under Section 432 of the CRPC to remit the sentences. However, there are certain restrictions also. This power with the state government is not absolute. Section 433A of the CRPC puts certain restrictions on these powers of remission. It says that where a sentence of imprisonment for life is imposed on conviction of a person for an offence for which death is one of the punishments provided by law, or second condition is where a sentence of death imposed on a person has been commuted under Section 433 into one of imprisonment for life, such person shall not be released from the prison unless he had served at least 14 years of imprisonment. This is very important. Therefore, I am repeating it. There are two conditions. First, where a sentence of imprisonment for life is imposed on conviction of a person for an offence for which death is one of the punishments. Or the second condition is where a sentence of death imposed on a person has been commuted under Section 433 into one of the imprisonment for life, such person shall not be released, but yes, he can be released if he has served at least 14 years of the imprisonment. So these are certain legal aspects which you should keep in mind. The Supreme Court guidelines or the grounds on which the remission can be considered, the ethics or the basic objectives of the remission, that why there is a remission policy. And with the help of these things, you should think that whether the step taken by this government is right or wrong, or what could have been done further. Now this is a reference article. This topic has appeared at page number 6 and is in relation to the freebies. The article talks in detail about the analysis of the policies which are being implemented by several state governments as well as the central government, which otherwise can also be called as freebies. So this issue has been discussed in detail in the previous DNS. Here I am mentioning two important DNS. First is dated 5th August 2022, whereby Webber sir has discussed the issues of freebies in detail. Similarly, in the DNS dated 3rd August 2022, Nave sir has also discussed this freebies issues. So both these DNS cover a different perspective and cover this freebies topic in a holistic manner. So in order to understand the relevance of these policies, the issues associated with such policies, you must refer to the DNS dated 5th as well as 3rd August 2022. So now is the time for the question of the day. The question from yesterday's DNS was in regard to the Lingayat sect. The question asked, which of the following are characteristics of Lingayat sect? Qualified monism, cremation, opposition to pilgrimage, yoga and meditation as path to salvation. As far as this question is concerned, option D, that is 1, 3 and 4 is the correct answer. The question from today's DNS is, Rathole mining is prevalent in which of the following states? A. Karnataka, B. Kerala, C. Jharkhand, or D. Meghalaya. So that's all for today. All the very best and study hard.